Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 34, Stages of Harmonic Audiation.
Okay, Eric, so today we're going to talk about the stages of audiation and specifically how harmony lines up with the stages of audiation, which is something that I don't hear anyone really talking about. So
I've felt that I wanted to go through the stages of audiation and really think how that interacts with tonal audiation, obviously rhythm audiation, and really think deeply about these stages, because the first one's easy. So there's 6 stages of audiation, and the first stage is this momentary retention. Right, and that can apply tonally or rhythmically. Let's not talk about the individuals yet, but you just heard something, and then you're going to hold on to it beyond your perception. Perceiving being, it hits your eardrum. Some people might not even call that perception until it goes to the brain and it's perceived. Other people describe that as sensation before perception, like you've sensated it. But without getting deep into early bits, Gordon says stage 1 of audiation is you heard something musically, and it could be rhythm, could be tones, could be music, could be anything, right? You could even a bird call. And you hold on to that in your imagination, in your mind somewhere.
In your working memory.
Yes. Imagination has an issue because it's not an image. And some people in other music ed groups say, you imagine sound, and that's why Gordon came up with audiation, because image is visual and audio is audio. Audio.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for just one thing on the stage 1, I think you actually have to have a conscious experience, not to go super far down that, because if something could impinge on your eardrum, but you weren't paying attention to it, like if we were in a noisy room and there was a melody playing in the background, it technically hit my eardrum, but I might not have been paying attention to it, so I didn't have an actual impression of the melody. Yeah,
intentional or unintentional attention. So you're paying attention, where it's accidentally coming, into your consciousness. Do you ever see this? This guy dribbles a basketball, and they ask you to count how many dribbles he does. No. And they show a video, and you're counting, every time he dribbles the basketball, and it might be like 25 or 26 times or something. And then they replay the video, and they say, don't count the dribbles, just watch the movie, watch the video. And there's a man in a gorilla suit that comes up and gets behind the guy while he's bouncing the ball, and you've never seen it. You just don't see it.
So I've seen that. I've seen that, but not with the. It was done with a different. I don't know the proper term for this, but the initial task you were supposed to focus on, like counting the basketball, that was exchanged for something else. But this shows how much your mind filters out sensory data when you have a goal.
Yeah.
So if your goal is to focus on the dribbling, non-dribbling sensory information is just drowned out.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
So that might happen, and does happen, I'm sure, in music.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah, so you got to momentarily retain something with either some intention or without necessarily attending, or without being intentional about it.
Which is basically being interested, I find. If you're bottom up, gripped by something, it's often out of novelty or interest.
Yeah.
Like you're not even trying to focus on it. You just find it so interesting. It just shows up.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's stage one. That's easy, I think. It gets deeper when you really think about it. And then stage two is imitating and audiating tonal patterns and rhythm patterns, and recognizing and identifying a tonal center and macro beats. So if we let's just take it tonally. So you're able to imitate and audiate tonal patterns and recognize and identify a tonal center. So basically, there's a resting tone here somewhere. And you're able to imitate and audiate tonal patterns and recognize and identify this resting tone. So now you've got some context, and the context isn't a tonality yet. The context is just this note that is the one that, the bass note, the baseline note, baseline tone that from which you can now start to establish a more objective sense of what you're doing, but it's not a tonality yet. All right, so how do we break that apart? Imitating and audiating tonal patterns.
So imitating is interesting. So it's, at this stage, we're making an attempt to actually reproduce some sound that I always think about it. We have a sound, enters our mind. We have this momentary retention of it. While it's in this momentary retention kind of vat of working memory, we try to imitate what we're very temporarily hearing internally or audiating. But we're also pinning it down so it's going into it has a context. And I think we could illustrate, what happens if we don't supply resting tone. So if you just start singing tonal patterns and I don't establish some kind of resting tone when I'm trying to imitate that, I'm not really going to retain the information in the way that I want to, because if one time you sing a set of tonal patterns, I hear a certain resting tone, and then another time I hear another resting tone, it's not really being organized in my mind in a dependable way. It's essentially going in different filing systems.
Yeah.
If I hear So T Ray, and we're supposed to be in major, like you said, we're not necessarily thinking tonality yet, but I have a resting tone in mind. That So T Ray is going to be stored differently than if we're in Dorian, or if I'm hearing Ray as the resting tone.
Yeah. Bottom line is, more fundamental than knowing the tonality is that you have a pitch center, a tonal center.
Which is actually, this is really useful to know. This is something that I've been doing more recently when trying to learn harmony, is just, instead of just singing the tonal pattern, just sing the resting tone. Listen to the tonal pattern and just sing the resting tone. It gets really useful, I think, at any level. Because if you can't summon the resting tone, I mean, you're gonna be lost at sea pretty fast.
Oh yeah, no, there's no understanding without the resting tone. Kind of like me listening to somebody speak Japanese, maybe. It's just noises. There's no meaning, and the beginning of getting that meaning, konnichiwa. I got one. I got one thing.
So it's interesting. Stage 2 going into stage 3. Stage 3 being establishing objective or subjective tonality in meter. So this is different than the last stage, was identifying a tonal center and macro beats. This is kind of a level beyond that, where you're establishing either subjective or objective full-blown tonality or meter.
Yeah, and all subjective tonality means is that you and I might disagree at the tonality. Like if I played this, you could be audiating this, right? That's where it's going. Or you could be audiating that in Mixolydian, whatever. So
that's what I heard.
Yeah, whatever you heard might or might not be the same as what I heard, or not heard. We heard the same thing, what you established a resting tone that was different than my resting tone earlier, stage 2, or stage 3, your resting tone and my resting tone, right, could be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would agree on the tonality, likely, unless it might not be. So
That's the funny thing about objective here.
Yeah, is that you could establish the same resting tone and tonality as me, then that would be objective tonality. If you establish the same resting tone as me, but I heard it in a different tonality.
I mean, a good example of this is the Aeolian versus harmonic minor versus melodic minor. I consider melodic minor to be an actual tonality if it's used in a certain way. So, like, we could both be hearing la as the resting tone, but I'm hearing the underpinnings of melodic minor being more like a tonality versus something else.
Yeah, either the music is a little bit vague, and we would disagree, or the music's less vague, and that would tend to have us agree.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Before we started recording this, I didn't realize. I thought we were just going to go through this part super fast and get to the harmony stuff. But it is really interesting. But I think let's keep going. So, Stage 4,
consciously
retaining. Retaining in audio. Oh, you have consciously. I just have.
Yeah.
Mine says retaining in audiation tonal patterns and rhythm patterns that have been organized.
Yeah,
so organized into context.
Again, now we have to do it consciously. That's part of the update of the stages of audiation. These things have grown. There used to be just 5 stages back in the 80s. So yeah, stage 4 and 5 got separated.
Okay.
So you're consciously retaining in audiation tonal patterns that you have organized.
Which is different than momentary retention. So like they're similar in a way, but stage 4, you're retaining it with the context along with it. In stage 1, there's something in your mind, but it hasn't been organized yet. It's just
it's a smaller bowl nested inside the larger bowl of resting tone, and that resting tone gives rise to your ability to objectively or subjectively establish tonality, if we're just talking tones for right now. And then now you've got to nest inside this tonality the tones, right? The patterns. So you're organizing the patterns, because you can't hear every note. You're attending only and retaining only certain notes, and the rest of it you fill in with your experience.
Sure.
It's just, it goes too fast.
Which is why passing tones are possible, because you actually, if you have, for example, a melody that's outlining a certain function, but there's a ton of passing tones in it, your brain can easily just kind of say like, oh, that sounds like a tonic chord with a bunch of stuff kind of around it.
Yeah. And you have to organize those patterns by listening to the notes that you're hearing, all the tones that are happening.
It's funny, organization is a funny word for this, because I think someone could go the wrong way with that word and think it's somehow theoretically organized in their mind, but like at this stage this can all happen, just from listening to things and singing a bit.
All these stages occur kind of like in a wheel, and you might only get to stage 5 before you go back to 1, or you might only get to stage 3 before you go back to 1, and it just keeps spinning. So if you think of a hamster wheel, the hamster's not got enough energy to keep going, and it's just, you could do stage 1, 2, 3, 4 in a matter of a microsecond, and then back, and then just keep spinning that wheel. Obviously you have to retain something before you can find a tonal center. And you've got that tonal center is established. It has to be established before you can objectively audiate meter or tonality. And then you've got to retain tonal patterns inside that tonality, and they need to be organized. And how they're organized is in these patterns that help give more precision to the level before it. So stage 3, tonality, and then stage 2, a tonal center, and then before that you've got to attend,
Mm-hmm.
got to pay attention, or be made to pay attention, or whatever. So now, stage 5, consciously recalling patterns organized and audiated in other pieces of music. So now you're making a comparison between the patterns.
Yeah, so this is one I think we should highlight because they're like stage 4 and stage 5 are phrased very similarly, but there's a difference in stage 4. We're talking about retaining patterns that have been organized versus recalling patterns organized and audiated in other music. So like to you, there's this comparison.
Yeah, you're comparing what you just started to begin to audiate by retention and going stage 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
4, you're retaining the patterns in what you're listening to. 5, you're comparing that pattern to something in other pieces of music, and although those other pieces of music aren't happening, you're now saying those are somewhat familiar, or if they're not, then you haven't listened to enough music that way.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because this is why when you're learning some new piece of content, you need a listening vocabulary or repertoire that has that element in it, or it's just
this is where it can fall down really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You get 1, 2, 3, 4. You're not going to make it to 5 if you don't have enough experience in that tonality. Now, if you have experience in that tonality, you go 1, 2, 3, 4. You get to 5. It's like, but I haven't heard music like that a lot before. So you're organizing tonal patterns, but now you're not certain. So you can't spin up to 5.
This one's really interesting to watch as a teacher, or to watch students go through, because you teach them a new song or a new little pattern in a song, and they all of a sudden start saying, hey, that sounds like this other song. Hey, that sounds like this other song.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a conscious thing. It's like they just immediately pull up all these other songs in their mind. It just shows you how associative all this is.
Yeah, and it can happen, and if something's totally familiar, right? Then you're able to say, "Oh, I know what's going to come next." Or if it's a familiar context or familiar pattern, or so familiar. Go back all the way back to the beginning. You have to pay attention. You've got a resting tone, and now I've got established tonality, and now I'm able to take those whatever I'm hearing this melody say, and I'm turning it into tonal patterns. And now those tonal patterns that I'm organizing, do they make sense in the context of other songs I've heard that are in that tonality? So now you're recalling patterns, right? Organized and audiated in other pieces of music. So you've done that. You've done the stage 4 work elsewhere. So stage 5 brings it more confidence of, hey, I recognize this enough, not because necessarily I've heard it before, but I've heard other tonalities like it before. Just sticking with the tonal piece right now. And now you're able to, from that, because it's that familiar, it's like, I think this is going to come next. So you could play me a jazz tune right now that I've never heard before, and I could still predict, because I've listened to a lot of jazz, but I haven't listened to this tune that you're just playing. So I would be able to predict, and sometimes I would be right, and sometimes I would be wrong. And maybe that's why I like jazz. Because it's often,
no doubt that plays into it.
It's often, because if you can predict everything, that's pretty boring. You need to.
Yeah, and we've often talked about that's why Mozart's so interesting to listen to, because he sets you up to predict something and then just explodes your expectation.
He throws the banana peel on the ground.
And a simple language analogy with the last one, it's like if I say I went to the, you have a ton of nouns or places or whatever you want to. You have a ton of words that show up in your mind that could finish that sentence. You have some ability to anticipate how to coherently finish that sentence.
Yeah, Isn't that how humor works too?
Yeah, it sets
It
up.
throws you off.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I don't know much about the psychology of the psychological mechanics of a punchline, basically. But there's some kind of expectation built, and then it might be toyed around with in terms of
Yeah,
um, something has a double meaning or.
yeah. My favorite is time flies like an arrow, and fruit flies like a banana.
There you go. So the
Groucho Marx.
okay, so the that was a big setup for basically talking about how does this play in when we talk about harmony, because I've kind of, I'm on the dark side. I've entered the side where harmonic learning sequence is a thing. It seems like there's an aptitude to it.
There
It
is.
seems like you have to be really young to take advantage of this aptitude. It seems different in the sense that um, growing it probably has a tighter window of development, probably at a prenatal, if not, really young age.
Yeah, it's possible. There's not enough research to know, but all I know is that at 2 and a half, and certainly by 3, kids are able to reliably take it. Not everybody, but there's some children who will attend to the 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes. Half of that, which is the directions.
Do you think this podcast would be interesting to people if, like, I had been one of your students? I'm just like full grown, like proofs in the pudding. Eric knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, you're working on getting married, so
Mm.
who knows what'll come after that. I just became a great uncle, so
Yeah,
just
I don't think
yesterday.
kids are in the. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna have offspring
Okay.
because musical offspring. It'd be a lot. You have a case study right there.
And not, yeah, but at any rate, we would need to run a pretty big study and provide experiences for one group and not for another, or different kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested, we'll put a link in the show notes, and you can take this. It's basically a survey of items, Survey Monkey, and I'll put it on. I'll put a link to it. You can give it to your anybody under 6, 7, even 7 years old and younger. And don't be surprised if your 2 or 3 year old doesn't want to do it. You have to catch them when they want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't want to, don't force it. Just
Yeah.
and then you just have to report what the kid says, not what you want the kid to say. But we can do that. So there is uh, a, a lot of variance in children, and some children at 4 or 5 years old do not do very well, and some children at 2 or 3 do pretty well. Might get 1 or 2 wrong, generally 3, but it definitely is an aptitude, and you can uh, and you see the results of those aptitudes in action, especially after you've learned a kid for 5 years and understand how their harmonic aptitude is influencing what you're teaching.
At least anecdotally, from my teaching experience, teaching piano and guitar, um, I I'm not giving people aptitude tests, especially not harmonic aptitude tests, but I'll teach someone for 3 or 4 years, and you can see who's interested in playing chords and who's not. So, like, often, I teach a lot by rote and by ear, and everyone likes learning melodies of familiar songs because it's very satisfying when you start as an instrumental student to play melodies, because that's what people are singing, that's what they're audiating. But there is a very small subsection of students that actually like playing chords that are not attached to melodies, and I would not be surprised if this is correlated with their harmonic aptitude, because a lot of them are just, quite frankly, not interested. The level of skill that it takes to play certain chords on the guitar is a lot for a beginner guitar player, And if they're also not interested in playing chords for their own enjoyment, like if you put them in a song, they tend to enjoy it more, obviously. But a lot of them, from what I think, after I've had them for 3 or 4 years, you start to see like possibly who has good harmonic aptitude because they just, quite frankly, they just eat up chords, and often lessons don't even consist of. I'm not even teaching them a song with a melody that's attached to these chord progressions, and they just want to play them over and over, just the chord progressions.
Yeah,
I find that interesting.
I'd be curious to give those guys, you know, HIRR, harmonic improvisation readiness record, or or the rhythm improvisation readiness record, and see if that hypothesis, you know, um, seems valid.
Yeah, because at least numbers wise, it seems like it's about 3 to 5 out of 40 students that have super strong harmonic aptitudes. And when I mean super strong, like I'm not testing anyone. It's just those are the students that are like eating up learning chords and composing songs with chords.
You know they have high aptitude because of their achievement.
Yeah, and I'm comparing that with the dosage, so like I'm seeing them for 30 to 60 minutes versus other students that I've seen for 30, 60 minutes for the course of, similar amount of years, and they just seem to be achieving at a much faster rate. So that, I mean, I'm not making any huge claims about their aptitude, but they're at least observationally, it's like, oh, this person's already learning like jazz harmony, and the other person's like still not really wanting to play 1-4-5.
You can assume high aptitude from high achievement. The problem is you don't know the other way around.
Yeah, and I think I've really enjoyed our conversations because I feel very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Now that seems more clear to me than it was, I think, in the past.
Yeah. So, are we ready to put harmonic audiation in here? So rhythmic audiation is pretty simple. You're retaining, and instead of a resting tone, you're establishing a beat or a pulse somewhere, right?
A macro
and
beat.
then you're a macro beat. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah.
And stage 3 is now you've got a meter. So now that macro beat and micro beats come together, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got to get the patterns inside to that context, and then is it familiar from other pieces of music? Now you're stage 5, and then now you can predict. So that, I think that's pretty easy once you understand the tonal rhythm. Obviously not a pitch; it's the meter that we're after, and you've got to have a meter only after you've established some kind of beat somewhere, a macro beat in this case. So eventually you predict, and that's where we're going. So harmonically,
this gets very interesting because there's an immediate issue that shows up at stage 2. But
yes.
So the stage 1 it's very similar.
Yep.
Like, okay, we hear it.
You gotta pay attention.
But at stage 2, how do you imitate harmony if you're not singing tonal pattern? Because we're talking about like a full harmonic gestalt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So I was saying off air earlier that there may be something to guitar players and piano players being able to by rote play these things on their instruments that might help. I mean, that doesn't mean they're going to be audioing what they're playing, but I mean, maybe this is why I think one way we could look at harmonic audiation and the stages of harmonic audiation could just be in the context of a harmonic progression. So because a lot of that seems to clarify a lot of this stuff.
Listen, if you know yes and no, which is what I've been successful at teaching 2 and 3-year-olds, right? In fact, you don't even need to teach it to them. You just give them this measure that I have, this game, Dr. Eric's, game of harmonic understanding. So, if you know yes and no, you pretty much have established tonality. And I think that harmonic recognition, and I don't know where that comes from. So you don't have to have tonal patterns to be able to do yes and no. In fact, knowing yes and no makes tonal patterns easier. So harmonic audiation in its stages is a little bit disruptive to the way they're set up, because tones don't give rise to harmony. Harmony gives rise to tones, at least in my thinking about this. It certainly is the case that harmony is easier to audiate because it can be done at a younger age. I can't get 2 and 3-year-olds to audiate tonal patterns and sing them for me. I can get them to imitate a little bit, but they are not capable of doing patterns at the oral level. But they are able to tell me yes and no and discriminate between those two harmonic functions. And so if that's the case, this harmonic aptitude or harmonic stage of audiation kind of takes those stages 2, 3, and 4, where you don't have to worry about having the capacity to sing in your mind or audiate tonal patterns. And if you do, it's probably easier for you to audiate harmonic patterns. And then are those harmonic patterns familiar to you? Mm-hmm. And then you're up to 5 and 6, then you can predict. So I think harmonic audiation in stages kind of collapses and makes easy stages 2 and 3. Sure. And then only once you've got the harmonic patterns there, then tonal patterns can come in at stage 4.
So I just want to support what you're saying, because Eric's experience is doing this with super young kids, and I don't have nowhere near as much experience teaching super young kids. Once in a while I get a 4 or 5-year-old, but my own experience with learning to audiate harmony definitely is support for what you're saying, in terms of anytime that I by rote played myself the chord changes I'm trying to learn to audiate, and then later learn to sing as tonal patterns basically. It's always easier than starting with the tonal patterns. And by easier, I mean I'm audiating the chord progressions and the functions at a higher quality in less time. And that's kind of what I was saying before about there might be something to guitarists and pianists being able to do that for themselves when they're teaching themselves new functions. But yeah, I'm a really big fan of that. And at least there's other learning theorists. We've been talking about Engelmann a lot, but I just want to bring this to the public's attention, because I've mentioned this to Eric a lot, that Engelmann actually encouraged people when they were learning hierarchical types of information to start at the biggest hierarchy. So, I mean, what does that mean for music? It means that the function should be learned before the individual content that makes up the function. Or in a language analogy, you want to teach kids what vehicles are before you teach them what buses are. Because then you can say, well, a bus is a vehicle. But if you teach them what a bus is, they tend to resist calling a bus a vehicle later on. They'll say, no, that's a bus, that's not a vehicle. But if you teach them what vehicles are at large, they tend to have an easier time. And I think the same thing goes on with functions and tonal patterns. You teach someone to audiate the full function first and recognize it, and perhaps even use it on the instrument. The tonal pattern it just seems to fall into place easier. And I mean, it'd be great if we could do research on this.
Yeah. So what happens here is you start to collapse oral verbal associates and experience all at once, like stage 3, because you can't help but if you know 1-5-1, and kids don't know it, but they know you can't end the song there. So there's this, yes is the tonic chord, and no is the dominant chord. And it could be major or minor, but major's more familiar. So it's easier for kids to respond and label what they're hearing. And how do they label that? Well, they just know that the song can't end there. Or, there's songs that do end on the dominant, and just drift out to nowhere. Some Chinese folk songs can end on dominant, and also, Gabrielli, Baroque music will sometimes end on the dominant. To give you an eternal feel at the end of the song, it never really ends because you don't get the resting sound.
But the fact that it makes you feel like it doesn't end is like they're comparing it to the expectation of it ending.
Yes, exactly. So it doesn't take away that doesn't mean because the song ends there that it always is the tonic. But those are few and far between compared to those that either end on a very objective tonic, which is why I think major and minor.
I have a piece of sheet music in front of me, and the last chord is D minor. Surprise, the song's in D minor.
Tonic. So what I'm saying is, when a 2-year-old says, "No, you can't end there," "Please as white as," and you end on Ray-T, so the kid goes, "No, you can't end there. You got to end on here." Yes, that's where you end. So when you have a kid tell you that's where it ends and that's not where it ends, tonic and dominant, that's where it ends, that can't be where it ends. No. You've established objective tonality, and the kids can retain that, right? And say, "Oh, you played that for me before," or "I recognize this in these other songs." And that's a really good reason why I like doing my first thing is I teach, Mary Had a Little Itsy Bitsy Spider, Wheels on the Bus, and Go Tell Aunt Rhody, anything that has the same exact harmonic pattern and the same exact harmonic rhythm, so that kids start to recognize it, so that when we go to yes-no songs that have a different harmonic rhythm, that it sticks out to them.
Can we pause on that for a second, because that's an insane point. And this is often, I think this is why a lot of people struggle with learning jazz, because like there's all these crazy functions, and then when they get a new function, they're trying to get it into their ear. There's not necessarily a wealth of songs that have the same function that they're trying to learn in the same harmonic rhythm, in this, in the same song structure. So it's hard to kind of intuitively pick up on the fact that this is the same thing in all these songs. You can't get to stage 5, comparing things.
Yep.
So having a bunch of songs with the same harmonic structure, same harmonic rhythm, makes that stage 5 come to life.
Yeah, because then you could compare them exactly, and then you're predicting.
And then once they're comparing enough, you can actually make subtle variances on purpose. You can start playing with the harmonic rhythm and say,
you introduce a function that isn't yes or no, and it's like you've torn down their prediction, because where's yes going to go to? No. Where's no going to go to? Yes. And I let them tell me what to play. So one kid will say no, 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 and then finally somebody will say yes, and then somebody will say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and they think that's funny, but where are you going to end? Right? And the kids, yes goes to no, no goes to yes, and eventually I'll play a 4 chord. And it's like, is that yes or no or something different? And if they can't tell me that's something different, then they don't know yes and no well enough. So I go back and do more songs, or do it for a longer time. And then by then they're predicting with yes, no easily. And now you've made it so that the prediction is wrong, because now there's uh-oh. And now you could go 1-4-5-1, or you can do 1-4-1-5-1.
Yes.
right? Or you can do 5-4-1 as I do in the blues. So now you've got all these new options, and but you got to nail those down before you go further. So you're constantly interrupting the stage 4, 5, 6 in there, because the establishment of tonality is just so much more easily done with 5-1 than it is with tonal patterns, and that I'll go to my grave on. It's just,
well, I mean, a lot of MLT teachers even use chords before they launch into something to do such a thing.
I think that this is just it's not as effective as this. That's like rock solid. This. So it's good, and you should establish. Well, right? Yeah. Well, you can put.
I just went to minor.
Yes. If you're not at an instrument, right? If you don't have if you don't have a uke around your neck, right? If you don't have a piano,
I don't know why
you're walking around
you're a music teacher.
You're not giving your kid then what you're doing is robbing them of the experiences of harmony.
And you have no excuse not to have a harmonica with you.
You need to have some kind of you need some harmony. You need to give them harmonic listening experiences so they can develop their vocabulary. The same as we give them all kinds of, and this is not to say that every song, no, half of your songs should have some harmony, sing melodies by themselves. Sure. Do chants. I do chants all the time. I do chants, 2-3 times a class. But I also make sure that I'm giving them harmonic vocabulary by singing a melody while playing harmony, or while I play a melody, I'm also playing the harmony that goes with it. Often enough that they have a chance to grow their listening vocabulary. And then eventually their naming vocabulary, because that's really what happens next. And then they sing roots. And once they sing roots, then now you've got the whole world opened up to you in terms of all the tonalities. And it's so much easier with, and you could refer back to our earlier, we had an earlier episode on essential functions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so much easier for children to understand meter too, but tonality. It's like this. Rather than.
Even the second one's I think for a lot of people, more recognizable after you do the first one.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the benefit of using the more scalier type thing is that you could a student could learn to sing that on their own.
Yeah.
Sing that themselves.
Yeah, you can.
So, I mean,
you can't perform harmonic functions away from an instrument, except through patterns. And it's very helpful. Let's underline this again. Singing tonal patterns. It's really, really, really essential to better understanding harmonic functions. We're not eliminating them. We're not supplanting them. We're saying that it's easier to learn harmonic functions than it is to learn to sing tonal patterns. However, tonal patterns really strengthen your harmonic understanding, especially, as you add the verbal associates to it and then make those comparisons at partial synthesis.
There's something here between kind of the stage 4, 5, 6 that we've been alluding to, but I think is really important from a practical standpoint. We talked about having familiar songs with familiar harmonic functions in the specific order. So all these songs that were Mary Had a Little Lamb, Wheels on the Bus, they all have this 1-1-5-1 thing. And at a certain point, you introduce more changes in the harmonic form, but you keep the same functions. So if they know 1 and 5 or 1-4-5, you do a bunch of songs with 1-4-5 that are in different orders. And this I think what this leads to is your ability to anticipate more, because now, well, I've heard a song where the one chord goes to the 5 chord, or the one chord goes to the 4 chord, or the one chord just stays on the 1 chord. So you almost develop like an ability to anticipate it going in all these different directions, and that's not really spelled out as an activity you should do in these stages, but it clearly is something that helps.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you only know, if you know 1 4 5, but you only ever hear a 4 chord after the 1 chord, I don't think that doesn't mean you can't hear the 4 chord, but it's different than knowing songs where the 4 chord is played for different harmonic rhythms and put in different spots and like.
Oh, I just got a different idea. Here's something I always did, and then I got this other idea. So what I've always done is like, I'm teaching resting tone, and we sing, "How I wonder what you," and the kids crack up because I'm destroying their prediction.
Oh yeah.
I'm just destroying it because everybody knows Twinkle, right? And I do this maybe 3 or 4 years old. It could be frustrating because kids at 3 don't want you to do things wrong often. And I just like lose it. That's not where it's supposed to end. It's supposed to end here. But what I haven't done, and this is the new thought I had, is doing.
See, I like that stuff.
I ended, right? But it's not ended. That's right, isn't it? But it's wrong. Right? That's not the right sound. So I haven't teased their prediction harmonically by throwing in the wrong.
That's what deceptive cadences are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a tone in the melody, maybe not, but often there's a tone in the melody that is cashing out, but the harmony underneath is getting
usually a 6 chord, minor 6 chord or major, right?
That's why tritone subs work, because you hear T, but you put a different chord under it that has T in it, and part of the brain likes it, and part of the brain's like, holy smokes, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So I wanted to just mention, this stuff is absurdly powerful, because I've always been very quick to learn harmony. I mean, when I met Eric, like, I was fine with audiating all the tonalities and all the functions and the tonalities and all that. I've been doing that for years. But from having our conversations, I've been trying to push my own like harmonic audiation further, and my goal right now is to audiate all the tritone subs of all the secondary 2/5s, and I'm making my way through the list. But just using Eric's methods has made this so fast. Like, I'm averaging, one every couple weeks is being added, like dependably added, and all I do is I just record the chord progression on my iPhone. I record a set of tonal patterns, familiar pattern, familiar order. It takes about a minute to listen to and sing, and I just listen to that a couple times a day, and it's basically musical steroids. And I just feel this would be very useful for the world at large to know, especially kids taking like jazz degrees in university. I mean, just considering how much some of these people practice with such, I'm talking about a 5-minute a day investment has the benefits. It's just really useful to know about. I'm surprised more people aren't using that themselves. I mean, I often wonder how many teachers are still pushing their own stuff.
Yeah.
Further out.
Push your own harmonic audiation. It's more laid out tonally and rhythmically in curriculums that abide by MLT, capital MLT. But this harmonic piece is definitely an expansion, and it works because the children have shown me that it worked for over 15, 20 years that I've been developing it. I'm just honing it, and now with the addition of my boy Sig Engelman, I've got a new chasm to fill in terms of getting more reliable progress from all of my students.
So that's one thing I've been doing is a lot of the stuff I've been experimenting is just your work plus Engelmann's like ideas for when to introduce what and how much success you should have before introducing something else. And it just works like clockwork. Like I literally have a piece of graph paper that shows the stuff that I can harmonically audiate, and I can kind of predict how long it will take me to get something new in my ear now, unless it's really absurd. But even then, it's just a matter of going through the motion almost.
Yeah.
And finding songs that have those functions in them that I can actually listen to.
Yeah, and it's just funny because I didn't know Engelmann at all, but I found it in the kids. So, but now it's distinguished, it's present to me, so now I can actually use it rather than stumble around till I find what the kids are ready for. But so I just want to explain this. You said really quickly. You said 2-5-1 and everything. 2-5-1 of all the dominants of the dominants. Say it again.
So I'm learning to audiate. So you take all your functions in major 1, 2, 3, 4. Your 1 chord, your 2 chord, your 3 chord. You learn to audiate the secondary 2-5, so the 2-5 progression that goes to every one of those functions. So, like for example, the 2-5. Let's use the key of C. The 2 chord in the key of C is D minor. So I'm learning to audiate the 2-5 that would go to that D minor, which would be E minor 7-5 to A7, and then also learning to trade the A7 in for a tritone sub. So I've done all the first stuff.
So there's now I'm going just 2-5-1, but so now we're taking that same progression, and instead of this being do, you're going to end on what? Re?
Yeah.
But you're in the context of
the reason we call it secondary and not just like the reason I'm not gonna do E minor to A minor to D is because I'm pretending like the D is now the tonic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing 2-5-1 of D minor.
Yeah.
But you still hear it in the reason I prefer to think of it as secondary because it's not like you're changing keyalities into D minor, which is the wrong way to think about it, because you still hear C as the resting tone.
Yes. You're playing the same chord but in a different context.
This was really helpful for learning how to do this, because when I first started trying to do this years ago, I would hear that as a key change. But now what I do when I make my little tonal pattern and harmonic patterns, you establish C as the tonality, go through it a couple times and just sing C, just sing do. As you hear those progressions, so you hear the 2-5 of 2, just sing do. It'll keep hammering do in as the resting tone, and then later on, like I can hear that as a key change into D minor, but it also now sounds like it's not quite gone into D minor. It's still nestled in C, which is I think the problem that people have is like, and this is why again, my crusade on pitch letters is that once you get into this, I really think that it's more useful to use pitch letters, but refer to past episodes.
If I get to that point where I'm teaching what you just said, which wouldn't be that hard if I had the kids an extra year, because they're all they need to do is re, ra, do, or mi, me, re. They all just hear the roots, have listening vocabulary of the functions, have, all I do is Mary had a little lamb, I think we've done this before. Right? And I just asked them, do you want it the right way, the wrong way, or the jazzy way? The right way is major, the right way is minor, and the jazzy way, and I suppose I should do a jazzy minor eventually too. But the kids get to choose, and therefore they're getting this experience, and they're getting it with the experience of something they already know. You're just changing one thing. And the one thing I'm changing is the, instead of so, do, I'm doing re, ra, do. And I can do re, so, do, but I just happen to do this one first. So they're learning tritone substitutions before they're learning 2-5-1s. And that doesn't matter because it's what their experience is.
No, it doesn't matter.
And so I can go back in the 2-5-1, it'll be easy.
So I have no doubt you can do this with solfege, but I think there's an instrumental pragmatic consideration here is that when you use the pitch letters, So for example, this 2-5 of 1 to D minor, that's also the 2-5 of 1 in D minor, and it's also the 2-5 of 3 in B flat. And it's also,
Yeah. Yep.
It ends up making it easier instrumentally because you're at some level going to need to know what pitches you're playing. And so
but that's when you get to that point. I'm saying
and I
the
still wonder
preparation
when
to that point. I just say it's easier to start with these verbal associates because they're expandable. They'll work in every key.
Sure. I mean,
and once
we don't know. Like we don't know. I mean, all I'm basing this off of is jazz musicians don't use solfege generally. Some of them know it, but a lot of them don't.
If they had, wouldn't it be easier? It's easier for my 4 or 5-year-olds.
That is true. That's true. I mean, but your students are also not playing instruments, which is, maybe a confounder.
Yeah, for sure.
But I still think best practice is, movable do, law bass minor. When your kids start learning all the secondary dominant 2-5s, then you're probably got the green light to do pitch letters.
Yeah.
I mean, for now, I think that's safe.
Yeah, if they have I would say, if they have a whole lot of experiences in most or many of the standard chord progressions.
So I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And my interest in the pitch letters here is connected. Like I tried to use the solfege and it's fine, I can do it, but it ends up getting so cumbersome in terms of you can think of everything as movable do, the law bass minor. So that 2-5-1 to D minor, I could think about it as D minor was now law, but it ends up being so much mental overhead to track where you are. You might as well just learn how to do everything with pitch letters.
Yeah, for you, it's like hearing a new language, and I just think maybe you haven't had enough experience in that language to make it worthwhile. And it's
but
not
see, the problem is when if you use solfege, you still need some way to track where the keyality is going. And so to do that, what are you going to do?
Oh, you sing the rest of the time. Yeah.
So when we're talking about progressions that essentially change keyality or could be viewed as changing keyality every bar, you need some way to label how the keyality shifted. Mm-hmm. So if like do is now la or do is now whatever. And all I'm saying is that the benefit of pitch letters is that it eliminates that problem. It just now you can think of every keyality and how they're related to each other, because you could audiate like major going up in major seconds, but if you use solfege for that, that's one of the greatest things about movable do, the law bass minor, is that you can move it, but you have to have some way of labeling what the move was. And that's why I don't think this is really a big deal in choirs. Yeah. Because in choir everyone's just doing it orally anyway, but on an instrument it's really useful to have a way of pinning it down. Like, no, the keyality moved like this far on my instrument.
Yeah. I'm not totally disagreeing with you. It's just when you're ready. What you're saying is
Eric's come a long way, guys. I think the first time I mentioned this to Eric, there was some tension.
Yeah, no, we weren't.
I literally,
we weren't going to talk about it.
I wrote my arguments down on flashcards, and I went for like 2-hour walks, and I'm like fucking ordering the flashcards. I'm like, he's gonna say this to this. Like I need a way to defend this, and
when they're ready.
But that should be my PhD like dissertation.
When they're ready. And we might disagree about when they're ready.
Yeah, fair enough. I still stand by the fact that I think there are different systems of tonal labeling, and some systems might be better under certain circumstances. Yep. So like I think there is a bias here, and MLT curriculum often has songs that are very well navigated using movable do, law bass minor. It's not a surprise, but there's some songs that are just like painfully inconvenient.
When I get into so what I would need to do for myself is to see how quickly I can get my kids to do these tritone substitutions and 2-5-1s and that kind of stuff into reading and writing. It's a symbolic association with that, and then eventually, I do introduce. When it comes time to introduce notation, the first thing I do is put up, 7 sharps and 7 flats up on the board. And then I teach them, the last sharp is always T. And the second to the last flat is always do.
So I think that works when you're using again, like I said with choir, when you're using students that are navigating notation like purely with their own audiation, they have no instrument to rely on. The problem with an instrument is that you need a way to talk about a specific pitch beyond its solfege context, and I think that's a big deal.
And when
that is a problem.
And so when I do that, and everybody understands that this just means that the last sharp is T and the second to last flat is do, then I teach Bob Eats All Day Gets Called Fat, and Frank Can Go Driving after eating breakfast.
Yeah.
That's just what I learned when I was in high school. But I'm here teaching that to first graders are learning, and that's just a mnemonic, trick. And so now they know pitch letters, and so that what that means is that now I'm going to put a tone, and I put the G clef up, and I said, this is where the girls, this is where you sing, and this is where I sing. This is where girls and boys sing here, and I put a bass clef, and this is where I sing. When I'm not in my, boy's voice, tell them my boy's voice stays with me forever. And once I do that, then they can say, okay, that's I say this is G do, and they read the rest with solfege.
Sure. Yeah.
Or whatever I pick. They pick and then I have them pick the keyality, and I show them how to work through that when they're ready. You want Mary Had a Little Lamb? Okay, let's write it down. Let's show you what it looks like. And I expose them to all the sharps and all the flats, and they can pick anything they want, and they see how I...
Yeah, see, when you're getting someone to sing, I mean, that's not a big deal, but if you try to do that with a guitar player, it's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
You can't introduce that many key
elements. Yeah, it's not an
cause so much confusion.
It's not an audiational issue. It's a technical issue.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if I give this example through, again, the stages of audiation, when you look at stage 5, like recalling patterns and comparing them to what you've organized mentally and other music that you've heard, why is what I'm saying with pitch letters useful? It becomes useful when, like, for example, I was doing this 5 of 2 with the tritone sub, so it's like in the key of C, it's like E flat 7 going to D minor, basically. That becomes useful when I know a ton of songs that have that progression, but also have E7 in other contexts. And then E flat 7. And I start thinking like, hey, this E flat 7 sounds different than this other E flat 7.
Yeah.
And this other E flat 7. And this other E flat 7.
Yeah.
So the information load that you need to get to for that to become powerful is high. And that's why I doubt anyone saying that, like, well, I tried to teach this with kids and they learned solfege faster. Like, no wonder, because when you use movable do with the law bass minor, everything is internally comparable. So you get this generalization possibility earlier on. But what I'm saying is that there are benefits that come once you hit kind of like an event horizon.
Exactly.
And it takes a long time to get there. But
when they're ready.
I will stand by the fact that there is a level of generalization you can get to when you're using pitch letters that you can't have with solfege. And the question becomes, like, when is that trade-off? If someone tells me they want to be a professional jazz musician, learn the damn pitch letters and burn all this in your mind. Every key, all pitch, because that's a reasonable task to ask someone to do. But if we have a elementary school musician who wants to learn some jazz, but they're not going to put that much time into it, like, just teach them the solfege, because I'm not saying the solfege is worse. I'm just saying, like, it might not warrant the amount of time you need to put in to get to this critical mass you need to get to with
at
pitch
some
letter.
point.
That's my argument.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's the best you've stated it, I think. You get to the point where you at generalization and the kids teaching themselves, and you've got pitch letter names that you've got to introduce. Then the kid will generalize into not theory but theoretical understanding. So and I think those two different things. So the readiness is always audiational, not knowledge. So
there is possibly another confounder, is the fact that I know the solfege as well. So maybe the benefits I'm experiencing come from knowing the pitch letters and the solfege, because when I sing that crazy tonal pattern I was singing before, so lights up in my mind, and I know like the G and the E flat 7 chord is so, it is the 5 of C, it's all that at the same time. So there might be that too. The solfege might have a, I mean, that's what I've claimed for a long time now, and I think learning both systems give you power to generalize in their own specific ways. So but I don't see how you're going to navigate key changes, like keyality changes, without having some way of labeling how the keyality moved. And you have to either do that theoretically, or like it'd be so awkward to say, like, if we go from B flat major in a piece to C major, like how are you going to label the shift? You have to use, like, we're not going to say whole step. People will have a heart attack. Right? But are we going to say that Ray turned into Do?
Yeah, that's what I say. I have my second graders. I have a song that goes, it starts in D Dorian, then it goes to F major, and then it goes to D minor, and it goes from D minor back to D Dorian. And and so, just Ray is now La, and then, right? And I just, we go up to here, now change. Now when they play A, it's like, that's now me. It's now me in F Do, and now it goes from F Do to D La. So it's now me La, because now we're in minor, and now we're going to go back. So now call this Do, Re.
But see, if you don't see, what I'm saying is, if you use the pitch letters, there are some insights that you gain that you can't have with the solfege. Like if you say we were in D Dorian, F major, D minor, to me it's like, well, D Dorian going to F major, what's changing is the B flat. B. And I mean, that's harder to glean from the solfege than, because if you know the pitch letters and the solfege, I mean, you can have the insights of both.
Well, yeah, I'm just not ready with them yet. I wouldn't have been. I wouldn't have been ready with them to do that yet. I want them to audiate so I'm having them audiate modulations, and that was no problem for them. So that's all. That this is now the resting tone, and now this is the resting tone. Now this is the same resting tone, but it's different. Like D, it's D Re and D La, and that was interesting to them. And then F was Do. For long enough that they recognize it as major. This is my little one is in my book that does that. My lullaby, called Little One. Why don't you please go to sleep?
I'm not familiar with it, but
so this goes.
The changes are fine. I mean, I also think another issue with this pitch letter thing is not a lot of people that learn pitch letters, like as their like possible verbal associate. I don't think a lot of them are even using it like that, but they only learn major and minor. They don't even learn the tonalities. So they're like, they're further from, what we're even talking about. Because I'm talking about using pitch letters, but learning all the tonalities. Yeah. But a lot of them aren't even doing
giving
that.
Them
it's just
really strong vocabulary of tonalities and functions, right, and meters. So if they have enough of all of that, then they're ready for whatever they're ready for. And when they're ready for pitch letters, you do that, especially when you're teaching instrumental. This is the thing. I haven't been teaching instrumental enough, except my xylophones that I use with the kids. And that's easy because the freaking letters are on the bars.
Oh, yeah.
So, I just give them a place to start.
I'm a fan of that. I mean, a lot of piano teachers would, roll over in their graves with the letters written on the piano, but it just
Well, my daughter was 3 years old, and she went downstairs to the piano, and she supposed that because every time she played the xylophone and the leftmost key was always C, she started on C. So
was it actually a C on your piano?
No, it's A. It's a
real piano.
It's I wasn't sure. The leftmost keys, it's a standard piano. So I got, I've got red marks on the ivories with permanent Sharpie. So
it's funny too, because like people with perfect pitch, like what I'm advocating is different than perfect pitch, because like if you have perfect pitch, you have this problem with transposing instruments.
Yeah.
But if you use pitch letters as like a non-perfect pitch based thing, like if I'm reading trumpet music or I'm reading something else, I don't care. Like I can, it doesn't matter to me. Which, if we look at it from the absolute perspective or the transposing instruments perspective, it's all fine.
Yeah.
That's
fine. All right.
Well, I couldn't help.
Yeah, it's a good argument.